This is the Impunity Observer podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host and publisher of the Impunity Observer. And we just last week published a really insightful review of some deeper research that has come out regarding the status of the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. Now, for those who are not familiar, these have such an important place in history. Charles Darwin went there famously and theorized about evolution. Anyway, it is a environmental haven these days, and tourists flock there. But of course, there are many challenges with this location as well. And there's been a new report out from the Ecuadorian Institute of Political Economy, IEEP, given the Spanish abbreviation. And the title is GPS, A Crisis in Evolution. And the title we gave was How Meddling Came Back to Haunt the Precious Galapagos Islands. And the subtitle is Ecuadorian Think Tank identifies opportunities for superior nature conservation. And we are fortunate to have the research director with us. His name is Francisco Zalles, and he is a professor with the University of the Hespérides. And now, clarify for me, is this in the Canary Islands? Where is this university?
Yes, it's in the Canary Islands, and we've launched a global observatory on island economies.
Amazing. Gosh, man, I'm kind of jealous of your lifestyle there.
Well, come on by and come to the
I
Galapagos.
know, seriously, I've spent a lot of time in Ecuador, but I've never been to the Galapagos. My first Spanish school was the Galapagos Spanish School in Quito. How they got away with that name, I don't know. But so, okay, there's a lot to say here, and yet you have familial ties to Peru and Ecuador, and apparently you spent a lot of time out there. So, was that the chief motivation, or what really made you think that there's a real problem here that needs to be studied?
I decided to move permanently back to Ecuador and the Galapagos. Really, I tried to go back to live in the Galapagos shortly after COVID. And as I was living in an island or an island archipelago 1,000 kilometers from the mainland has its obviously its challenges.
Yeah.
And I was fully prepared for those challenges. However, I started looking around and basically speaking to most of my friends that live there on a permanent basis, and discovering one after another of of problems where humans meet nature. And the constant complaint was that there is a lot of money to study natural phenomena in the Galapagos Islands, but nobody was studying the social phenomena. I'm an economist by training, so I naturally, started looking at what incentives were breaking down, what was creating these problems. It became apparent to me that the problems that exist in Galapagos, if they are not fixed, will create a natural catastrophe in the Galapagos Islands within the next 25 years. And that's what that is at the heart of the report. We can I want to say prove, you can't prove anything in the natural sciences, but I can very much defend a thesis that within the next 25 years, Galapagos will have a biological crisis because of the lack of water treatment, or a natural crisis because of the methane that's coming out of the garbage deposits, which is not being properly treated, and which will light those islands up on like kindling, especially the most populated island, which is Santa Cruz. So this was motivation. It was getting there, was seeing it. I visited the Galapagos Islands for the first time in 1982. Um, I've been able to go over the years and see this deterioration. Um, and also it should be noted, Fergus, the Galapagos was the first natural World Heritage Site declared by the UN. Only 30 years later, it was already declared in a natural site in danger. And the reason it was declared natural site in danger was because of the massive explosion in both tourism and the tourism bringing in permanent residents, and not being enough infrastructure or plans to deal with this. That was one reason. The other reason was overexploitation of the fishery stocks, because there was no clear handling of
Is it just a
fisheries
free for
management.
all? Just everyone is having a crack at it?
As long as you're a Galapagos resident, it is a free for all.
Oh,
If you
wow.
if you're not, you can be an Ecuadorian resident, but they've declared a residency only for Galapagos, inhabitants. And of course, Ecuador is a low institutional country, so you don't have to be born in the Galapagos to be considered a Galapagos resident. You can gain residency through various means. A lot of them just illegal, quite honestly,
Sure.
or,
Yeah.
or in the gray area. There is a fantastic market. If you go to Galapagos today, you say, "I'd like to come and live here." The first thing they will tell you is marry a Galapagueña, and it costs
Sure.
$10,000. There's an ongoing market for
Yeah.
marriages to local residents. Um, to the point that one of my local lawyer friends is considering, making an argument for polygamy in the Galapagos Islands so they can sell their residency various times. That's the level of absurdity that we're reaching in terms of permanent residency. But if I can dig a little deeper into this, um, so permanent residence and the law in Ecuador pays permanent residents. The minimum wage in the Galapagos Islands is 80% by law more than the mainland. So permanent residents in the Galapagos really don't want to do a lot of the manual labor that has to be done in agriculture to feed the 30,000 permanent residents that are on the islands. This is perhaps something that we need to establish for the listeners. There are currently 30,000 permanent residents on the islands. The islands receive about 330,000 visitors per year. So there are 11 tourists for one permanent resident. One of the things that we highlight, getting a little bit segueing, one of the things that we highlight in the report is that if demographic growth continues in the same path that it has continued in the last 10 years, and we want to maintain water usage and contamination at the same level, in 50 years, no more tourists will be able to visit the islands because permanent residents will have taken up all the resources that can be used in the islands. Now, long before 100% of the tourists are gone, way before that, we're going to have an economic crisis because the permanent residents will not be able to sustain themselves because 80% of the economic activity of the Galapagos Islands is tourism. So and why do I say this? Because 100% of the water resources on the island of Santa Cruz, for instance, are already contaminated beyond human consumption. They're not considered fit for human consumption. So if you've got all the water on an island that receives 300 visitors a year, contaminated for human consumption, and you're not letting in new investment so that desalination can take place, so that you can harvest water from rainfall in a more efficient way. And you're not letting it in simply because you want to preserve the exclusivity for the Galapagos residents. And you're creating better economic conditions for the Galapagos residents than exist in the mainland. You're creating a recipe for disaster because people are trying to immigrate. They're immigrating illegally, and they're increasing the pressure on natural resources like water and conservation and nature. But let's sticking directly to water, which is an easy one to look at. They're increasing the pollution in the water resources, which are already polluted. And this is just unsustainable, completely unsustainable.
My colleague, our communications intern, she actually highlighted three aspects. One of them was this population challenge. There's supposedly pretty heavy restrictions on who can and cannot go to the island, but that just has failed. But before we address that, I want to understand the fisheries because if it is a free for all for locals, you also said that they only really have tourism. Who are they selling the fish to? And I read years ago that there were, I think, Chinese or Japanese fishing boats coming in and poaching. So, do you want to clarify just the status of the fisheries that who can and how much can they fish, and then who is actually buying the what is taken out of the ocean?
The Galapagos fishing fleet can fish within the economic exclusive zone of the Galapagos and within the national park. and they can sell their fish on the mainland, and they can sell their fish directly to the consumption of the 330,000
Just
tourists.
let me confirm that. Are there no zones off limits to fishing in Galapagos?
Yes, there are. As of the latest agreement that was signed 2 years ago, there are zones that that are limited to long line fishing, but there are no areas which are completely off limits to fishing to the Galapagos fleet. Even mainland Ecuador boats cannot go in and fish in certain economic exclusion zones. So let me go back a little further. The Galapagos Islands has no Aboriginal inhabitants. There are no native Galapagueños. But over the last 30 years, 30 years basically, they've created this political persona to be able to exclude others from the natural resources. One of the major actors in this is, of course, the fishing fleet. The fishing fleet, and we know this for a fact, they have been the major contributors to the almost extinction of sea cucumber in the Galapagos Islands, for instance. The Galapagos Island sea cucumber was fished almost out of extinction. There are now serious vedas, they call them, which are uh, time periods in which you cannot fish them, and then they open them up for very very small periods of time. And of course, there's complaints because they say, well, we only get paid $500 for a cucumber, but it gets sold in Shanghai for $15,000. I'm like, well, there's solutions to that, and that's called private property. Like if you were able to farm sea cucumbers, you would be able to, or if you were given a quota of sea cucumbers that you could trade afterwards, then we've seen this happen in other places in the world, such as New Zealand, such as Namibia, such as off the coast of Galicia. We've seen major recoveries in fish stock when you give private property rights to the fishermen on a quota of the take. Then they start really defending the stock of fish because they know that they own a certain percentage of that stock of fish. But if the fish don't have any ownership rights, then there's a significant incentive to overfish, especially long line. And then long line has tremendous amounts of waste in their fisheries. But it goes even further. Fergus, it's amazing. Ecuador takes Ecuador subsidizes fuel for fishermen. The fishermen in the Galapagos Islands received subsidized fuel from the mainland. It's taken from the mainland all the way to Galapagos. They buy it at subsidized prices in the Galapagos Islands, and then they take that fuel, and instead of fishing, they go and they sell that fuel to the illegal fishing fleet, which is sitting right outside of the Galapagos Reserve. And what does the illegal fishing fleet do? They send what's called fish aggregating devices, FADs. They set them on the eastern part of right before the national park starts. They'll drop their fish aggregating devices with satellite devices so they can track them. Let those drift through the Galapagos Economic Exclusive Zone and just catch whatever they've aggregated below those fish aggregating devices right outside the economic exclusion zone. So Galapagos is being hit not only by its local industry, but significantly being affected by the use of these devices outside of the economic exclusion zone. And you can look at the maps and you see
Who is using these devices?
everybody, absolutely everybody.
No, but are they just Ecuadorians or is it an international fleet coming?
The international fleet will do it. They will drop them off, and then they will just sit by and wait for them. Now, there have been instances of, and there's plenty of instances of ships just turning off their transponders and going dark. So I don't know if you're familiar. The largest debt for nature swap in history recently took place 2 years ago, involving the Galapagos Islands, and the biggest part of the investment that the Ecuador receives as a result of the debt for nature swap is precisely to make these fishing fleets compliant with international standards to be able to, try to stop this problem. But I'd like to focus the study didn't deal much with fisheries yet. That's being handled, is being looked at by others. It's also a problem that brings in the narcos, and we want to preserve our health, if you will, because we feel that the biggest problem in the Galapagos Islands is not necessarily overfishing at this point. It's it's the inhabitation of the islands without anybody taking a look at just how sustainable that is, or what policies need to be put in place so that the islands have a sustainable amount of population on them. The Galapagos Islands receives a lot, or if you're lucky enough to get a Galapagos residency, then you receive a whole bunch of subsidies that make it very, very easy for you to stay on the islands. Instead of paying the full cost of living in volcanic islands 1,000 kilometers from the mainland. This increases the amount of people that want to move to the Galapagos Islands. And since it's a low institutional country, it's kind of easy, not easy, but you can get a permit under the table to live in the Galapagos Islands. And this is what's contributed to this massive explosion in permanent residency.
For mining stock recommendations, one newsletter I read is Global Analyst by Adrian Day, and I'm more than pleased to direct other people to his insights. Receive a 10% discount when you subscribe with the FERG coupon code. Go to adriandayglobalanalyst.com and click subscribe at the top right. You can also call the US phone number 410-224-8885 and mention the FERG code. That is adriandayglobalanalyst.com. You can also click the link below or in the show notes. Thank you. I don't think people realize the severity of the situation because I had not heard of these challenges until this report, right? So there are so many layers to this. It is tough. And you said you're working to make this more of a series or an ongoing broader research agenda.
The objective of this first publication was to precisely to create some awareness of just how deep the problems go and give some examples. Because if we were going to, we realized very quickly into our research that if we were to research the whole thing, we'd be writing a book and nobody was going to read a book. So we needed to publish something a lot more concise with very concise examples so that people could become aware of the problems. And one of the problems that we highlight is the problem of coffee. The Galapagos political entity that has been created around these permanent residents have been able to create an economic exclusion of any competition from foreigners. Foreigners means even Ecuadorians from the mainland. This has serious repercussions in terms of all the infrastructure investment, including the boats in the Galapagos Islands. Today, nobody will reinsure a boat in the Galapagos Islands because there's so many incidents and sinkings in the Galapagos Islands. But that's not what we highlight in our report. What we highlight in our report is coffee. About 15 coffee growers were able to exclude coffee imports into an island that receives, like I said, 330,000 visitors a year and 30,000 permanent residents. So nobody can import a single grain of coffee, even instant coffee, into the Galapagos Islands. It can only be grown on the islands. Coffee happens to be a thirsty crop. And these are islands that, like I said, that have no potable water, that are where water is scarce. So these are the type of institutional arrangements and regulations that are being put in place, which clearly diminish the conservation efforts in the islands, but they're being put in place because someone can exploit the resource. So that this is what we wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I want to try to finish this off by just clarifying, let's say, the structural problem here, because you have an immensely precious resource that is historic, has so much, let's say, nature that people want to go and see. But the governance is very confusing. It is so far separate from the mainland Ecuador, and then it doesn't have its own, let's say, council. It's governed by some kind of administrative board, which is set by the president. You're trying to clarify that. What is going on here? There's a very confusing setup, which has somehow meant that Ecuadorians on the mainland are basically subsidizing the destruction of this island or these islands. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of the things that we highlight that's both a positive and a negative, and this is the reason why we want to we're trying to raise funds to be able to really take advantage of the opportunity, but at the same time look at longer term efforts to close some of these gaps. Constitutionally, Article 258 of the Ecuadorian Constitution gives Galapagos or what's called a special regime status. Not like other countries that we've looked at similar situations where they have to go and try to either create laws or constitutional, spin-offs. Ecuador already has this mechanism. It's just being poorly implemented, very poorly implemented, and it's allowing for regulatory capture from the permanent residents. So the governing council of the Galapagos Islands has 9 members, 5 of which are named by the executive, 4 of which are elected within the municipalities of the different islands that are inhabited. And let me just take a step back there. Of the islands that are inhabited, one island has 19,000 residents, another island has 900 residents, but they have equal voting in the governing council. So you can imagine how much regulatory capture can take place. But the reason regulatory capture is taking place by the 4 members over the totality of the 9 members is because there's only 30,000 voters in the islands. So for the executive, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Unless the Galapagos makes headlines internationally, the executive just kind of leaves that council to its own self-management. The management is being done by the 4 independent municipalities in the Galapagos Islands, and it's in their best interest to exclude anybody from economic competition in the islands. So the institutional framework is young, but it has left us a route that we can try to fill with better institutional arrangements that allow for conservation. And this includes, for instance, private investment. There is no way to desalinate water in the Galapagos Islands because nobody will invest in it.
But isn't this board, and you say 5 of them, and I don't know how the 5 are selected. Are they also from the Galapagos Islands? Just people that the president likes? Yeah.
It's the president names a head who can be from the Galapagos or outside, and there are 4 ministries that are represented: the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Public Works, the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Environment, et cetera, et cetera. So there's 4 ministers and the head of the council, which are named by the president.
Okay, and it just seems to me that even the people who have, as you say, have captured this board, they're killing the goose that laid the golden eggs, right?
Without a doubt.
It seems like a very self-destructive path here. So it's a very short-term, I don't know whether you want to, I'm trying to use a gentle word here, but exploitation approach where you will
Yes.
exploit this land now, but as you say, in 30 years' time, this precious resource will be a disaster. And it appears that already many of these problems have arrived.
When the UN declared the Galapagos Islands a World Heritage Site in danger in 2008, they identified the problems. Now, the problems have not been taken care of. The problems have been taken care of. They're starting to take care of them. There's legislation to try to take care of them, but they haven't really been resolved. So if UNESCO were to come, and audit the Galapagos Islands, it would be very hard for them to not say that the conditions have not been met in order not to take Galapagos back into a World Heritage in Danger Site designation. The problems are only getting worse and worse and worse and worse. 3 weeks ago, the beaches in San Cristobal Island had to be closed because of the amount of E. coli on the beaches. Just 3 weeks ago. A year and a half ago, 4 tourists drowned because the ships, the ferries that take tourists from island to island are in such poor maintenance conditions that the boats sank within sight of land. But the crews were not well trained on abandoned ship procedures because they have to be Galapagos. There is no competition from competent seamen to be able to bring up the seamanship in the and maintain a international standard of seamanship. So let me give you another example. The garbage dump from in the islands of Santa Cruz is already reaching the ocean. These are things that obviously the tourists are never get to see. So the garbage dump is already reaching the ocean. Methane from the garbage dump has already caught fire once. The Galapagos Islands are dry tropical forest. That means they're kindling. During the dry season, they're kindling. So if we have another major methane fire from the garbage dump in Santa Cruz, we're looking at the whole island of Santa Cruz catching fire. So what we're trying to do is elevate the civil society's vision of the island so that the five members of the council, which belong to the president, actually get involved in changing some of this situation and changing some of these rules so that we can start some major conservation efforts from civil society, not just looking at nature, not just looking. There's a lot of money that goes into Galapagos Islands, but it's mostly for the animals, not for, looking at this frontier between animals and human beings. And if you think about conservation, conservation without getting humans involved is simply delaying the disaster.
So the report which Francisco has led is Galapagos: A Crisis in Evolution. And our own reviewer identified three elements. One, excessive population growth, despite attempts to slow that down. Two, a subsidized energy, which is causing both excess consumption and excess and pollution flowing on from that. Although you mentioned coffee is another contributor to this. And then third, a bureaucracy now basically requiring almost like a welfare state from the rest of Ecuador, which seems bizarre given that you would think this is such a lucrative place that it could pay its own bills. Now, so this is a 56-page paper, as far as I can tell here, and it is by the Ecuadorian Institute of Political Economy, which, as far as I know, is based in Guayaquil, on the Pacific coast. Now, I'm trying to think how to run this up here. There's just a lot of meat in this paper. As you say, there are many layers to this. The situation is complex. What do you hope to happen at this point, in terms of getting funding or in terms of working with IEEP going forward on this series? What's next for you in your research of the Galapagos?
There will be no solution unless we get the Galapagos involved. So we've started a local think tank. It's called Galápagos para Todos, Galapagos for everybody, and we have,
Whoa.
yeah, yes, with local Galapagos, which are aware of the problem. And we've also started a 501(c)(3, and it's called the Free Galapagos Initiative. And we want to free it of pollution, poaching, and poverty. Um,
Yes.
but the ultimate goal is to have the Galapagos be completely responsible for their resources. There cannot be a lasting solution to the issue of conservation if the people that live off of the resource are not directly aligned with what the resource provides and what they can consume. So if we cannot make those two match, there will always be an overexploitation of the resource. So our ultimate goal is to build and help build a framework whereby the Galapagos take over the implementation of solutions, and we want to help with the information and with the potential of building better frameworks, building better institutional frameworks. In the short term, we need to give them better institutional frameworks. We need to say, look, there are immediate solutions to the immediate problems. But the long-term problems require Galapagos society involvement, and we're working on the ground to do that.
Right. Okay. Francisco Zalles is on X. It is Zalles Francisco. And as I mentioned, he's a professor at the University of Hespérides in the Canary Islands. Amazing. A new project, as far as a new university, as far as I understand. But yeah, you've got Naples, Florida listed on your X account. Is this out of date?
No, no, no. My wife and I moved here a couple of years ago, but we're moving back to Ecuador on a full-time basis.
Are you then teaching online?
Yes. The university is completely online. It's so I go to Spain twice a year. As I said, we've got this observatory on island economies, which is quite interesting because island economies are very different from continental economies. They depend on trade. So the whole idea that they've built the Galapagos policy, which was implemented from the mainland, is to give Galapagos food sovereignty, for instance, that nobody should be able to import food in the Galapagos Islands because we can grow our own food. What is most Galapagos suffers from scarcity of foodstuffs every month. And that has to do with the third part of the study, which is the logistical arrangements of bringing food or other resources to the Galapagos Islands from the mainland. So the study has various levels, and the last part of the study is we went and we did a review with a law firm as to what are the legal frameworks and regulations that today pertain to the Galapagos Islands, so that we can start deregulating or regulating efficiently, because right now it's a mess. It's a mess between islands. Every island can sort of put their regulations up, and it's creating this very closed society, or this closed economy, when it's an economy that depends and will always depend on trade. So it needs to trade its tourism, it needs to trade its natural resources in order to live, in order to obtain and increase its living standards. Fundamentally, we base our theoretical basis is based on the Kuznets curve. And what we want to do is push the Galapagos Islands rapidly through the Kuznets curve, so that there's an inflection point and the Galapagos can start taking better care of this natural heritage site.
Well, you have me having to. I'll have to look up this curve after the show. But no, Francisco, thanks for bringing this to people's attention. It is such an important topic, and as you know, we noted, it hasn't really gotten any clarity or understanding in recent years. So this is such important work. And folks, follow him on X and through the university. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Thank you for bringing attention to this problem.